introduction. Growing up in Canada, we were multicultural, peaceful country. We really don't have an army. I grew up thinking that if you go to places like Oxford and study philosophy, in some ways, you know the drill. And when I started studying the Muslim Brotherhood and political Islam and the reemergence of anti-Semitism, I didn't get that in my formal education. At McGill, University of London, Oxford, you don't hear about these things. I kind of mistakenly began to study this in the 1990s. And going to places like the ICT conference and the Institute for Counterterrorism and the IDC, and beginning to hear people who came out of the military, who know the Middle East, who know the sociology, the history, the politics, the economics, the ideology, the language, the culture, the history, came out of the army, the Israeli army, and it blew my mind. And one of the key figures in this kind of area that began teaching a generation of us about anti-Semitism and the region and what was going on in the region is Yosef Kuperwasser. Yossi is a senior manager of the regional affairs for the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. It's an important NGO in Jerusalem. He's the former Director General of the Ministry of International Affairs and Strategy. He has a long career in the Army and in the IDF. He was the Brigadier General Reserve and served as Assistant Defense Attaché of Intelligence at the Israeli Embassy in Washington in the 90s. He's an intelligence officer in the IDF Central Command, and he headed the Analysis and Production Division of the IDF Directorate for Military Intelligence. And some of the best lectures I ever heard on what is going on in the region and the ideologies is from Yossi, and it's really an honor that he's here with us this evening. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody. I remember that when we started, people were saying good afternoon, but this was a long time ago. I came only for this evening. Charles always tells me, you should come. This is the third time he asked me to come, and I always have to apologize and not come because I never have enough time. But now that I've seen it, I must say, seeing is believing. It's unbelievable. It's really amazing to see this group of people so various, so varied, so committed to studying and learning. I'm really impressed. And the reason I am here, and the reason I deal with that, is that, I used to have anti-Semitism for lunch. My mother is a survivor of the Holocaust, and every lunch that we had at home, she was telling me how she survived the Holocaust. And her main message was very simple, because she was not a professor of anything. Her main message was very simple. It's all about the sanitary conditions. It's all about the sanitary conditions. We cleaned ourselves. I forced my brother, her younger brother, that was with her in the orphanage. I forced him to wash himself every time, all the time. We were washing ourselves. And when we were on the death march in the end of the long years of the Holocaust, I washed him with the snow. I took the snow and washed him with the snow. And that's how he survived, and that's how I survived. And I had that story every day in my entire childhood. My father, on the other hand, was also a survivor, never said a thing. He spent his Holocaust years in a forced labor camp in Hirschberg in what's Germany today. And he felt that compared with his wife, my mother, he doesn't have much to tell. So he was a little bit ashamed of the fact that he didn't have real stories to tell about how he survived. But later on I learned that what made him survive was that in his forced labor camp, his position was to take care of the kiln in the factory. And because of that, he managed to stay alive because this was a relatively warm place. Whereas the life expectancy of the people that were working outside of in the open was something like 5 months at best. And that's why he also fatal shame, because that he managed to survive because he was having such a good job. For me, it was clear when I grew up that I have to make everything to make sure that I or anybody that I know will have to tell these kind of stories for lunch to their children. And that's why I decided to stay in the military. I said to myself, that's the best way to handle this matter. And I spent 35 years in the military trying to figure out how we fight the attempts of other people to resume this idea of anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, another Holocaust for the Jewish people. And when I left the military, I kept doing that as the Director General of the Ministry of Strategic Affairs. We have established a lot of the activities that Israel does to fight anti-Semitism, because I tell you something, the fact that we have people here from around the world and not everybody is Jewish, to say the least, and that we have such a small delegation from Israel, just a very small one, is because Jews in Israel, fortunately, feel anti-Semitism less than any other Jews. We know how to take care of ourselves. We know how to fight against those who want to exterminate us. We're actually doing it pretty well. And the idea of anti-Semitism is a much greater concern for Jews who live outside of Israel. They feel it on a daily basis, unfortunately, recently. And when I started dealing with this, it was very difficult to convince people who are born Israelis to get involved in that. There is a community of people in Israel who came from mainly English-speaking countries who are very easily mobilized for activities against anti-Semitism. For them, it's something that was very important. For born Israelis, it's something, well, it belongs to the past. But I want to tell you, it's not. And what I'm going to speak about is this anti-Semitism that is happening in the Middle East. And if this works, and it does, unfortunately, we don't have in the Middle East one of the most well-known kinds of anti-Semitism, which is the one based on racism. But we have two others. One is the religion-based anti-Semitism, and the other is the national-based anti-Semitism known as Anti-Zionism, but actually it's the same thing. So when we speak about religion-based anti-Semitism, it is promoted mainly by radical Islamists, and this goes along very well with what the rabbi was saying. Radical Islamists want to rule the world. They think that Islam is a message for all mankind, and that eventually all mankind has to adopt Islam. And the prevailing world order based on Judeo-Christian values is totally unacceptable. They don't accept the Noahide rules. And that's why they were working very hard in order to convince everybody that Jews are the major enemies of Islam. We had this guy from Egypt that was brought up with those ideas. Jews are the main enemies of Islam. Of course, Islam has many enemies. There are those who, the polytheists, are very big enemies. But they are not very well presented in the Middle East, so you don't have to worry about them today anymore. Christians are a problem. Christians are a big problem. Because Christianity is even worse than Judaism in a certain aspect. Christianity believes that there is not only one God, according to the radical Islam. Christians don't believe that there is only one Lord. That brings up certain problems. Jews, in this respect, are relatively fine. If the main message of radical Islam is that there is only one God, Jews accept it. From that point of view, Jews are fine. But radical Islam also says that Muhammad was the last of his messengers. And the Jews refused to accept it. And Muhammad fought against the Jews and explained, according to radical Islam, all kinds of explanations why Jews should be fought against. And you know that the way they speak about that is that the Jews didn't understand that the Bible they were given. In the 5th verse of the 62nd chapter of the Quran, it says that actually the Jews are like donkeys who carry books. They don't understand what's written in it. And because they refused to accept Muhammad as a messenger, Muhammad himself killed many of them and expelled the others from their places where they lived at the time. That's why Jews should be treated very badly, but even though, because they believe in one Lord, you can, if they are ready to accept the predominance of Islam, you can somehow manage to live with them. They have to pay a special tax, but then you can live with them. This attitude is very common in the Islamic governed world. Even pragmatic Muslims find it very difficult to fight against it. Now we have to understand that the world of Islam today is divided between two schools of thought. The radicals, who, as I said before, believe that the world order should be changed as soon as possible, and the pragmatists, who think that even though there are some problems, many of them think that there are some problems with the prevailing world order, they don't believe that it should be changed, and they would rather focus on improving their capabilities to be competent in this world order. And the radicals themselves are divided between two schools of thought that fight each other. One of them says, these are the extreme radicals, say that the battle to change the world order should be fought immediately without any limits, because the West is very weak and hedonistic and just about to fall. And the other, which are the sophisticated, realistic radicals, say soon as possible means when we are ready. We are not ready yet, we need more time. And if we take advantage of the time given to us by those weak Westerners, we shall be able soon to be in a position to change the world order. But right now, it's too early. And those extremists who are trying to change the world right now are causing damage to the goal of Islam, of radical Islam. And of course, any of you who has any knowledge about Islam understands that these sophisticated, realistic Muslims follow the idea, the main idea of Islam as it was presented by Muhammad himself, which is the idea of Hudaybiyah, that says that when you are not strong enough, you delay your attack. You don't move too early. And much of the Quran is about that. So this reflects also on their attitude to the Jews. The extreme radicals want to kill them right away. They are part of this prevailing world order. They should be fought against and killed immediately. The more sophisticated ones say, okay, basically it's a good idea, but we have to wait a little bit. On one question they agree, that when it comes to Israel proper, Israel should be exterminated as soon as possible, which means even right now. The rest of the Jews, it's something different. The rest of the problems with the world. Now, this is religious-based anti-Semitism. There's a problem that Jews didn't accept Muhammad. And there are many other problems with them. National anti-Semitism is based on national ideas. And when you look at what is the Palestinian narrative, to understand why it is actually a disguised version of anti-Semitism, you have to understand what are the 7 pillars of the Palestinian narrative. And people sometimes find it difficult to understand that these are the 7 pillars of the Palestinian narrative because the Palestinians are very good in selling them in a positive manner. But these are actually, if you want to be a Palestinian, you have to believe in those 7 points. First, there is no such thing as a Jewish people. Jews are just a religion, a religious sect. Second, the Jews never had a sovereign history in this piece of land called Eretz Israel, land of Israel, or Palestine. And because of the combination of these two, the Jews are not entitled to have a state of their own, because the rule of self-determination relates only to peoples and in their homeland, not everywhere they want. So because of that, Israel doesn't have a right to exist as a nation state of the Jewish people. Third is that the Jews are terrible creatures. And they are here very close to those people that base their anti-Semitism on Islamic basis, because there are all kinds of ideas in Islam that Jews are the descendants of apes and pigs and so on and so forth. And Jews are terrible creatures. And that is the reason why Zionism was invented. Zionism was invented not by the Jews, but by the colonialist powers who wanted to get rid of the Jews in Europe and decided to offer the Jews the idea of Zionism so that the Jews will leave Europe and go to this place in which they will be able to stop Islam from spreading its power towards the West. You have to believe in that. If you don't believe in it, you are not a Palestinian. Abu Mazen wrote a full book about it, called Zionism from Beginning to End. And that's why you have to understand that Zionism is a product of colonialism and imperialism. And when you fight it, you fight against those evil powers. Number 4 is that because this is the case, or let me just one word before, and because Jews are so terrible, such terrible creatures, as you can see with apartheid and the way they treat the Palestinians and all this demonization that they do to them, because of all of that, there's no reason that the poor Palestinians will suffer their presence next to them just because the Europeans don't want to have them within their range. They should go somewhere else, wherever. Number 4 is that because of all of these 3, the Palestinians have the right to use any sort of battle or struggle against Zionism. And all those kinds of struggle are legitimate. And that's why it is totally fine to have BDS as a non-violent part of this struggle, but it is also totally fine to have terrorism as a more violent kind of the struggle. And we should reward, as Palestinians, people who fight against Zionism, namely against the Jews, in all sorts of activities. That's why we Palestinians are entitled to pay salaries to terrorists. because they are the fighting sector amongst our society. It's, number 5 is that we Palestinians are the only victims. This is less about anti-Semitism, but it's very important in this narrative. We are the Palestinians, we are the only victims in this conflict. And as victims, nobody can ask us, why are we behaving in a certain manner or a different one? Because the victimizer cannot expect accountability or responsibility from the victim, the victim itself. It's unthinkable. That's why we are not supposed to do anything about the idea of eternal refugee status that we give to our people. And that's why we are not supposed to say to anybody, what have we done with the money so many people gave us? Nobody, and we all know the answer. Number 6 is that our battle, and this is one of the connections between this kind of anti-Semitism and the original religions, we Palestinians represent a struggle that is both national and Islamic. And they are so intertwined that you cannot separate one from the other. By fighting against Zionism, we actually represent the Muslims. And of course we represent the Palestinians. And there's no way to separate between the two. And yes, we have amongst us people who are more religious and people who are more national, but basically they want the same thing. And number 7, which is extremely important, our struggle is for all of Palestine. We cannot accept even a small kind of evil. The big evil is that the fact that the Israeli power is strong enough in order to have Israel control most of the areas. But even if we manage to force them out from part of the areas, we shall never accept a situation where they control any part of the area. And that's why the Palestinians refuse to accept the new deal of the century, as they call it, and any other idea. Because any idea that has in it Palestinian acceptance of a nation state of the Jewish people in any grain of soil, on any grain of soil of Palestine, is totally unacceptable. It has to be rejected. These are the 7 points. Now, as you can see out of that, they are all containing the well-known points of anti-Semitism. Delegitimization, demonization, double standards are all in those 7 points. And they are promoted through hate indoctrination and incitement in order to make sure that every Palestinian will continue to adopt these 7 points. And by the BDS, or the delegitimization effort, that is there in order to convince the rest of the world to adopt these principles too. That's how they managed to force UNESCO to accept all kinds of decisions that ignore the history of Jewish sovereignty in Palestine. And that's how they even managed to bring the international community to adopt, only 2 years ago, Resolution 2334 of the United Nations Security Council that speaks about East Jerusalem as a Palestinian territory, including the Wailing Wall. This is crazy. This is how, by the way, today in America, Linda Sarsour, an activist of anti-Zionism, says that Jesus was a Palestinian. And according to the Quran, he had a brown color. So it's, which that might be, but I haven't seen him, but he was a Jew. That I can tell you. Now, what the Palestinians do in order to promote this ideology, to differentiate between the good old anti-Semitism and the new, is to differentiate between Jews and Zionists. Say, we fight against Zionists, but we don't have any problem with Jews. By the way, it's amazing. Those who told them to do that were the Vietnamese. When Arafat and Abu Jihad paid a visit to Vietnam in the late 60s, They were told by the Vietnamese leadership, listen, you need the American Jewry. We cannot win this war against America without the American Jewry. They were in the midst of this war. You have to find a way to address the American Jewry. And that is the way. Don't fight against Jews. Fight against Zionists. And they came back home and said, what a great idea. Of course we fight Zionists, we don't fight Jews. Although I must say that if you really follow what they're saying, quite often they mispronounce their ideas and they speak against the Jews. So you'll know that what they really mean. Now, this helped what was mentioned before by Charles, the issue of the Red-Green Alliance. Hamas, out of the Palestinians on the one hand, and PFLP, the Palestinian Front for Liberation of Palestine, who are extreme radicals on the left side, are both promoting internationally the idea of anti-Semitism, the new anti-Semitism of anti-Zionism, and they find friends in the ranks of mainly progressive or extreme progressive elements in the West. Must say that Hamas, in this respect, much like the Iranian version of anti-Semitism, mixes the two together. You hate the Jews because of religious reasons, and at the same time, you are allowed to speak against it on a nationalistic base. And you know, the Iranians deny Holocaust and so on and so forth. And if you look at the Hamas covenant, it's classical anti-Semitism, speaking about the Jews controlling the world and responsible for any war that was ever fought and so on and so forth. So to sum up, I would say that anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are actually the same idea with a different cloak. It's the same thing. It's common motivation, hatred of Jews. It's the common goals, in the minimum, to deprive them of the rights entitled to any other people or human beings, as was mentioned here before. And there are very similar methods. The BDS speaks about boycotts and and they are speaking very affirmatively about the need to denormalize relations with Israel, not to let people work with Israel, not to buy Israeli products and so on and so forth. It reminds us of what happened in Europe 80 years ago. Although anti-Zionism, as I say here, uses more updated and sophisticated discourse. They speak about human rights. It's great. Everybody wants human rights. As was mentioned here, Jews are the main promoters of the idea of human rights. It's correctly so. But it's used against us. And of course, they use the ideas of anti-Westernism, anti-colonialism, and anti-nationalism that are all mixed together in something that is totally unacceptable for us, the way they do it. But unfortunately, the fact of the matter is that this sophistication was successful. They did manage through this sophistication to impact the way people speak about Israel and about the Jews. And today, more and more progressives around the world have adopted this framework that they have developed. I was amazed when I formed a certain group of people to fight against it. And we had some students in the room. Most of us were older than that, but we had some students in the room. And a student, Jewish student, from a Jewish organization of students, stood up and said, you know, you are all outdated, you old guys, you are outdated. I, as a student in a British university, I cannot pronounce the word Zionism. If I say Zionism, if I say I'm a Zionist, I doom myself to be a pariah. I cannot say it. For us in Israel, everybody is Zionist. What's a big deal? But she said, I cannot use this term. Why? Because these people managed to turn Zionism into a term that carries with it so many bad things. And it's amazing to what extent this has become. Now, I have a friend, lives in Jerusalem. He's a journalist. He wrote a long piece, 19 pages long, in The Guardian, and he's not a progressive, he's just a liberal. He wrote a long piece, 19 pages long in The Guardian, about how terrible Zionism is, how we mistreat the Palestinians and all of that. I said to him, listen, none of that is true. None of that is true. How come that a person like you who live here say this kind of nonsense? And I wrote a rebuttal that was published in Tablet magazine. And he promised to rebuttal the rebuttal, but which he never did until now, and I hope he will. But this is unbelievable. Here's a real Jewish liberal that loves Israel, but believes in all the lies that BDS tells about Israel. It drives me crazy, but this is the case. So what do we do about that? I know. What do we do about that? We have two sets of policies who are very similar about what to do about it. When it comes to the radical Islamism, our policy today is, and this is also as far as I understand that we have Ilan Carr here, so he can speak better for the American policy, but that's what I understand. Our policy is today that radicalism is radicalism. It doesn't matter if it's a sophisticated, realistic radicalism, or is it some sort of an extreme radicalism. It's a big change, because most of Europe and the American administration until 2016 believed that radicals are only the extreme radicals, whereas the Muslim Brotherhood, who are the sophisticated Sunni radicals, or the Rouhani and Zarif in Iran, who are the sophisticated Shiite radicals, are just fine. They don't want to kill us right now. They are even ready to help us fight the extreme radicals. They are perfect interlocutors. Misunderstanding that what the radicals want is to change the world order. That's why they gave them this unbelievable president called the JCPOA. Today, Israel and the Americans say, no, all radicals are radicals. Secondly, what we say is, listen, you pragmatic leaders, you have a problem in your midst. The people are very much affected by the message of the radical Islam, and you have to change it. Now, you cannot change it head on. It's not going to happen. So what you need to do is to change the attitude on anti-Israelism. If you change your attitude on anti-Israelism, maybe the next move will be to change your attitude on anti-Zionism. Because Israel, for most Arabs and for most Muslims, is just a political entity that is not necessarily the nation state of the Jewish people. It's just a group of people living in a certain place. As Abu Mazen usually refers to us, we are the Israeli people, which is a new people he invented to replace the Jewish people. So once you are ready to accept Israel, there's a chance that the next move will be that you will be ready to accept the Jewish people and their right to have a state of their own. And once you do that, you may eventually able to face anti-Semitism, the denial of the rights of the Jews and the need, the urge to cause them harm. So this is the way we use this, we deal with this matter. I think the Manama workshop was critical in this respect. The fact that so many Arabs were ready to sit in a room with the Israelis and discuss ways of improving the situation of the Palestinians together with the Israelis was sending a certain message. We do that at the same time. We are vis-a-vis the radicals. We say maximum pressure. That's the American expression, maximum pressure, to force them to give up their ideology, to force the Islamic State to give up the territories it controls and the ideology it has, and to force the radical regime in Iran to give up its ideology and its quest for nuclear weapons. That's the message that if we are going to manage to achieve that, that's going to be very important. I must say that when it comes to Iran, it's a mistake. When it was the radicals, it's a mistake to put the issue of anti-Semitism on a back burner or not even present it at all. The fact that within the 12 points that Secretary Pompeo raised vis-a-vis Iran, none dealt with the issue of anti-Semitism is a mistake. And this has to be changed. When it comes to the Palestinians, the attitude is a little bit different. The carrots are much bigger than the sticks, although there are sticks. There is pressure. And there is an attempt to change their narrative. Those 7 points have to change. The message to the Palestinians is that if they changed it, there are lots of benefits to be gained, like what was told to them in Manama. But if they don't, there's much to lose, because time is not playing on their side. And that's something they have to understand when people say, listen, if you don't move forward, Israel may take all kinds of moves with American support regarding the application of the Israeli law in certain settlements or things like that. This is something that you have to bear in mind, because this is going to be bad for you if you don't do that. And on top of that, we are moving forward with the adopting of the ISGAP definition of anti-Semitism that I'm sure all of you are familiar with, as a definition of anti-Semitism around the world. More and more people adopt it, and with preventing support of BDS. And I must say, in this respect, the decision taken by the Bundestag on seeing BDS as a sort of anti-Semitism is extremely important. We have to show them firm determination and resolve in the way we handle these matters. Any winking or changing positions here and there is a disaster. And we have to be very strong on that. And we have to understand that the connection between the two kinds is going two ways. If we manage to convince the Islamic countries to move away from anti-Semitism, it's going to weaken dramatically the capability of the Palestinians to stick to their 7 points. That's what the Palestinians are so worried about right now. That's why they fought against the Manama. They understand that if there's a question mark over the question of the issue of anti-Semitism in the Islamic world, it's going to affect them dramatically. And by the way, we heard this story from our Egyptian friend, but I call upon you to listen to what Arabs in the Gulf states are saying today. More and more of them are openly saying, I have no problem with Israel. I have no problem with Jews. Actually, I find that the Jews are very impressive people. And if I can gain something of having relations with them, it's really impressive. My wife here, by the way, she became a celeb in Iraq, because the Iraqis feel that the fact that they lost the Jews has affected them in a very negative way. So they want the Jews to come back to them. And finally, I think it's not enough that Israel and the United States are doing that. We have to bring many more countries on board, especially the liberal democracies. They have to understand, because people were saying here, and this is going to be my last word, Charles, people were saying here a lot about, speaking here a lot about what brings them here. We have to understand, anti-Semitism, even though it's mainly against the Jews, It's not the problem of the Jews. It's the problem of those who adopt it. So we have to be very clear in joining everybody together in opposing this malign idea of anti-Semitism. Thank you very much.